This could very well be the best waiver wire slate that we've dialed up to date for you guys. There are so many players with upside, and it couldn't have come at a better time, really, with your fantasy playoffs starting in, a month? Let's get into this one. We'll start out with Joshua Dobbs. Joshua Dobbs is not only making a phenomenal underdog story for the NFL, but he has been very productive fantasy-wise, specifically since he made the transition to Minnesota, and things are about to get a lot better. Let me tell you why. After accounting for 3 total touchdowns just a few days after arriving in Minnesota for his victory in Week 9, Dobbs looked more polished and impressive against a tough Saints secondary in Week 10, and he had the whole week to prepare as well. Dobbs finishes a top 5 quarterback in most fantasy league formats after tossing for 250 yards. But here's an aspect of Dobbs' game I just don't see everyone talking about enough. The rocket scientist, yeah, he's got wheels. Just in a small sample size with Minnesota, Dobbs is averaging greater than 7 yards per carry, and he's tacked on an extra 11 points per game in fantasy from his rushing contributions over the course of the last 2 weeks. Now, this mobility is important because through 8 games, Kirk Cousins was actually blitzed more times per contest than any other quarterback in the NFL. So we have a mobile quarterback under center capitalizing with weapons like Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, and it looks like we could be seeing a Justin Jefferson return for Week 11. On top of all of this, guess who has the easiest remaining schedule from a fantasy quarterback perspective? That's right, Joshua Dobbs. There is far too much to like here for somebody only owned in 39% of leagues. Ty Chandler's up next. The stars have aligned for Ty Chandler to have an increase in usage in lieu of recent events. Cam Akers gets on the IR, and then Alexander Mattison, the original RB1 in Minnesota, goes down with a concussion. Well, all of a sudden, depending on the severity of Madison's concussion, of course, Ty Chandler might have just catapulted from the RB3 spot to the RB1 spot in Minnesota. He was tossed into the main role mid-game against the Saints in Week 10, and I'll be honest, Ty Chandler didn't jump off the page by any means. Chandler took 15 rushes for just 45 yards. He did score. He got in the end zone. The interesting point here is that Chandler's stepping into one of the most pass-heavy offenses in the league. With Alexander Mattison, he's averaging around 3 targets per game, more involved in the receiving game than he would have been in years past. But look, by no means am I ready to sell Ty Chandler as a smart PPR pickup, but in standard and half-point PPR, I mean, it could be an interesting look for sure. Antonio Gibson's up next. There's a larger and larger sample size building that is proving that Antonio Gibson is a sustainable complementary back alongside Brian Robinson Jr. in Washington. The touchdown this week, it was the cherry on top, but Gibson has already been an efficient pass catcher that has made him a serviceable flex option in some league formats, really over the course of the last few weeks. Week 10 just reinforced that point. When Gibson gets his chances on the ground, he is very efficient as well. We're talking north of 4.5 yards per carry, but yes, he is very reliant on that receiving aspect of his game. This is somebody only averaging 6 touches per game, which is alarmingly low for somebody we might even consider throwing in our starting lineup, depending on the league format, of course. But what Gibson is doing with that limited opportunity is what keeps him relevant here. With the Commanders being the most pass-heavy team in the NFL, throwing it over 68% of the time, there is room for Gibson to thrive here. And I really believe there's room for a few sustainable fantasy options on this Commanders team, considering they are 11th in the league in total plays run per game. In super flex and deeper league formats, Gibson is a no-brainer in terms of a pickup. In a standard PPR 12-team league with a single flex, maybe not so much just yet. Noah Brown's up next, so maybe Brown's Week 9 explosion was not a fluke. I did pick him up rolling into Week 10, didn't start him. That's kicking me now. This Texans offense is dynamic, and with Nico Collins being down in Week 10, Noah Brown emerged as a prominent option in this Houston receiving corps for the second straight week. Came over from Dallas, kind of caught fire toward the tail end of last year, and that's continuing now in mid-November. The man has at least 6 grabs and 150 receiving yards in each of the last 2 weeks. Brown has a target share hovering around 15% over the course of the last 2 games, but it's the big play upside that has caused the draw so far. His yards per reception currently sits at north of 20, which is pretty crazy. Brown will still have to compete with Collins, Dalton Schultz, and Tank Dell, all of whom have more targets on the season than Brown. But with CJ Stroud looking like a 300 passing yard machine week in, week out as of late, and doing a phenomenal job of spreading the ball out, I mean, it's so much to the point, folks, that 4 different receivers have at least 40 targets. That's rare territory right now. Brown is bound to get snatched up off of waivers heading into this upcoming week. If you're thin at the wide receiver spot, this guy has some phenomenal upside. Brandon Cooks is up next. There's a heavy amount of competition to be the secondary option on this Dallas passing offense. But I feel like some people forget that Brandon Cooks has 6, count them, 6 1,000-yard seasons under his belt with various teams. Dak took a liking to him in this last game against New York. Yes, it became a blowout rather quickly, but Cooks was second on the team in targets with 10. He failed to rack in just one of those, and he got into the end zone as well, which always helps. Cooks has now cleared 10 fantasy points in PPR formats through 3 of the last 4 weeks. So the market demanding a reliable wide receiver option in fantasy is likely going to jump all over this one. It may be a tough game environment for Cooks as the Cowboys take on the Panthers in Week 11 and are heavily favored, but then again, doesn't that sound familiar? That's exactly what happened this past week against the Giants, and look where we are now. Let's move on to Jayden Reed. We've talked before about the potential for Romeo Doubs to make himself at home on your fantasy team, and now Jayden Reed joins him, and he's averaging over 10 fantasy points per contest. And this upcoming weekend, yeah, he's facing a Chargers secondary allowing the most passing yards per game. When you look at overall efficiency across the board amongst this very young, inexperienced, unestablished, whatever synonym you want to use for this Packers wide receiving core, this is what you've got. You have Jayden Reed leading the way. In a yards per game perspective, there he is right at the top. Yards per route run, he's right over the veteran in this offense in Aaron Jones. Yards per target, yep, there's Jayden Reed. And in terms of yards per reception, 14.9, not too shabby. I'd say that's pretty impressive considering the sample size. Now, when we evaluate the competition, and this is nearly the exact reason I said guys like Dontavion Wicks could make an impact on this team in a year or two. I mean, it's clear that the wide receiver one on this team, in Christian Watson, that spot could be overtaken very soon. He's not exactly running away with that role convincingly by any means. Watson has been the intended receiver on 5 of Jordan Love's 10 picks this year, and many people are calling him out for not being aggressive enough in contested catch situations. Jayden Reed leads in receiving yards on this team and only takes a back seat to Romeo Doubs in receiving touchdowns. Favorable matchup, uptick in production, leading this young and experienced wide receiving core in a pretty much wide open competition. This is a no-brainer for me. Odell Beckham Jr. is up next. In almost every waiver wires video I've done, I put in at least one player who I'd suggest you pick up and immediately sell for value, because that's just a positive return on investment. Think about it. Your investment in getting somebody off of waivers is essentially zero. You drop the worst person on your bench for somebody who's just like everybody on this list, raising in value. You then turn around and sell off this option while he's hot. On the surface, Odell Beckham Jr. is a tempting pickup in general. This is an electric name that has been around for almost 10 years, is 2 knee surgeries in, and now has a mini touchdown streak of 2 games. Look deeper and you'll see the red flags. Just like all season, Odell Beckham is getting minimum volume relative to the rest of this Ravens receiving core. I mean, at the end of the day, Odell isn't just somebody who's on the field enough for us to trust, and we talk about availability, opportunity, and productivity. Yes, okay, Odell is available, he's healthy right now, but the other 2 aspects, opportunity and productivity, those work hand in hand, and I just can't trust somebody who's out there for 33% of snaps in one of the Ravens' most consequential games of the season against the Browns. That's when you're going to play the players you trust, and there's just not much trust to keep Odell out there in crucial games. But others might just see, oh, Odell is scoring touchdowns now, so I want him. Let those people think that. Let those people value Odell Beckham Jr. and let them have him for a price. Trey McBride is next up on this list, owned in just under half of leagues. Look, Kyler Murray is back in Arizona. He's healthy and he's firing on most cylinders. I wouldn't say all yet. There was a little rust there. But seeing that Trey McBride was a big part of this comeback game is huge for his fantasy value going forward, and he was part of a winning strategy. So, you know the motto, if it's not broke, don't fix it. We're seeing that he is Arizona's definitive tight end 1 option, of course, with Zach Ertz being sidelined. And this usage is something I think a lot of people in the tight end free agent market can get behind. But saying that he was the primary target over Hollywood Brown at this point, I mean, that's more promising than I think any of us expected. This still isn't a great Cardinals team. I also want to highlight that. I don't expect them to turn around and run the table, considering they were toe-to-toe with the Falcons offense that lacks identity and at this point, a certain option at quarterback, to say the very least. Over the course of the last 4 games, Trey McBride is averaging around 9 targets per game. He is getting volume galore. He's only 3rd on the team this season in red zone targets, but McBride jumps to the 2nd active option, again, with Ertz being out. And lastly, we have the Vikings defense owned in 23.9% of leagues right now. A lot of you like to ask what defenses are a smart stream for the week, but with the playoffs on the way, why would you not just take a team that's, owned in less than a quarter of leagues with the easiest remaining schedule and ride them out through the rest of the season? It seems like a no-brainer here, and with Brian Flores running a team that blitzes at one of the highest rates in the league, the Minnesota Vikings are the number 7 defense in fantasy from a scoring perspective already. This team is a turnover-causing machine, capturing 8 interceptions over the course of the last 5 games. They forced a turnover in all but 2 games, And the Vikings allow just 20.9 points per contest as a whole. That's 14th in the league, so not bad at all. So shake this reputation or this stigma that people have with the Vikings defense being poor and giving up a lot. Instead of the week-by-week approach that I'd suggest in most cases, if you can get the Vikings defense and stay healthy, why would you not keep them? If you're a Dynasty fantasy football player, we did just release a Dynasty buys video a couple of days ago. That's on the screen right now, so make sure you check that out. Ask any fantasy questions you have in the comments as per usual. Make sure you like and subscribe if you found this video helpful, and we will see you in the next one.